Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to my 1 month review of Starfield. This is Bad Day Guy Gaming. Um, we are at my outpost currently here, just doing a little spin around. That's going to play while I do my talking. There's a couple of things after 1 month that I wanted to discuss. Um, First of all, the world, as in this case the galaxy. Um, a lot of people are complaining about the game being 1,000 empty planets and things, and while there is in fact more content there than what most people are realizing because they don't understand how some of the mechanics work, even with that, I do acknowledge there's a lot of empty area, but I don't look at that as 1,000 empty worlds, but more of 1,000 empty sandboxes for DLC and mods. DLC, I believe, is going to introduce a lot into this game. It has some of the greatest potential of any Bethesda game for DLCs and mods that add locations. I believe modders are going to go wild with this, creating literally hundreds and hundreds of full campaign style DLC just because there's way too much open here, areas that can be used to add this without any kind of overlap. I mean, I believe the DLC and the mods are going to make it almost too crowded by the end of 2 years from now, 3 years from now. It's going to be kind of like Skyrim and Fallout 4. They started out relatively empty at the beginning, I should say. And while they had good content, the mods and DLCs just added so much more. And the problem is, a lot of people are looking at this game right now after 1 month, and I'm 1 month including the early access, but people are saying that it just doesn't have enough in it. Well, that's from two things. They run past half the content because they don't understand how Bethesda games work. And second, there's going to be so much more added. There's such a huge potential that eventually everything's going to feel just as crowded as Fallout 4 did at the end. Skyrim, even with all of its additions, still had a lot of empty space, but the way the game was designed, it didn't feel empty. Fallout 4, by the end, people who played Fallout 4 with all the DLCs and 300 mods, you couldn't take 5 steps without running into something. And eventually, I think this game will end up in a similar situation. I don't think it'll be Fallout 4 crowded, but I do believe it will be Skyrim crowded. So you will be able to have a lot more content on almost every single planet, and I think that's going to fill out a huge amount of it. Now, one thing I wanted to discuss that changed in this game compared to the past is obviously the ships. Most of the other games, both Skyrim, Fallout 4, and a lot of the historic Bethesda games, one of the big things is the emotional attachment people would get to specific weapons, specific armor sets, specific everything. Well, this game is different. The biggest emotional attachment that most people get in this game, it seems, is their ship. The ships in this game are amazing. The customization in this standard vanilla form is amazing. And I believe that's just going to be expanded on. And the best way to look at ships right now is think of them as cars. And then think of all of the car guys in the world and all of the customizations, spinning rims, underbody lights, exhaust kits. Everything that car guys do with cars will come to ships in this game. They will be just as customizable. If Bethesda were in any way smart, they would focus on a ships of the line type DLC that adds tons of components, tons more customization, and I'm talking about things like custom nose art, much more customizable pieces to where not only do you select the halves, but you can select interior layouts and colors and paint jobs and decorations and all of this stuff, because people's ships are one of the biggest emotional attachments you get in this game. I hate to say it, but it's even more than the companions. Companions can be as interchangeable as weapons or armor, but people's ships are their primary emotional connection to this game. And some of the things I think you're going to see is, like I said, massive expansions on through both mods and DLC of the ship building and custom system. Like I said, nose arts, even more custom paint jobs. You're going to have modders creating entirely new paint schemes, new colors. I would love to see actual metallic gold and metallic silver and things like that to be able to make your full golden ships and things like that. One of the things that I don't believe is capable right now within the Bethesda's game engine is to have capital ships with smaller ships that disengage and land that are the size of the current ships. I'm talking about massive capital ship size. But I do believe that modders will eventually figure out and add that functionality in. So the day of true capital ships may be coming to Starfield. Might take a couple of years, but it will come. Now we need to talk about one of the third aspects of the game, which is the weapons, armor, and clothing. The weapons and armor system, let's face it, it's pretty much a direct ripoff of Destiny, with the color-coded, rare, epic, and legendary weapons, different things like that, how a bunch of them function. It is almost a direct ripoff of Destiny, but with very limited modding that is nowhere near the level of like what Fallout 4 had. It is much closer to Skyrim standard weapons. You can enhance them, but you couldn't really change them and make them your own, which is one of the reasons why people don't have as big of an emotional attachment to them. I don't think the Destiny weapon system is bad. I think it does encourage you to seek out new and different weapons, to try new and different things. But at the same time, I do miss the ability to make my weapons my own the way that Fallout 4 did. I do think weapons and armor are going to be an Armory Crate style DLC that Bethesda will eventually put out. And when they do this, I believe you will then get the ability to significantly enhance the modding of the weapons. You will have much more choices, colors, everything. Individual paint jobs and color schemes for your weapons so you can make them your own. And if Bethesda doesn't do that, I assure you modders will. The clothing, on the other hand, let's face it, is pretty much a direct ripoff of Cyberpunk 2077. But again, I think that's okay. Primarily because if you look at the 1950s, everybody thought the future meant we would all be in glass domes and flying cars, because everybody had a common vision of what the future would be. And clothing is an exact representation of that. If you got 1,000 different people from 1,000 different companies to design futuristic clothing right now today, they would all have very similar themes, because current culture denotes what we see for the future. And so the fact that there's vast similarities between like Cyberpunk 2077 and this game is not a coincidence. That is a cultural phenomenon, so I don't blame Bethesda for this. In fact, I think it just fits right along with society. And that takes us into, again, Bethesda's biggest strength and weakness, which is the game engine. Let's face it, guys. The creation engine was basically written by quill and ink on parchment by candlelight. It's that old. Yes. But it's that old, and Bethesda is sticking to it for a specific reason. That reason is, if you look at the direction that Bethesda has been going with their games, you can kind of predict what the future will bring. They went from Fallout 3, where the characters running looked like they were androids. The animations were terrible, but the stories were good, and for the time, it was a very good game. But they improved upon it with Fallout 4. Skyrim was a massive improvement over previous games and titles, even though it was kind of a one-of-a-kind. at the time, but the constant improvements, and if you look at the direction they're going, you can kind of predict. If you look at one specific thing that Bethesda did pretty early, is they hopped on the VR bandwagon. Every Bethesda game now, from now going forward, will have a VR version. This game will have a VR version. And if you think hopping around with your boost pack now and zero G is fun, wait until you can do it in VR. I'm going to recommend your first few days keep a bucket ready because it's going to be nauseating. But once you get used to it, it will be amazing. All these people that have jumped off 300-foot cliffs and boosted across big giant gullies and things, doing that in VR is going to be amazing. One of the typical things that Bethesda's always been good at is the worlds. They build amazing worlds, and in this case, I think they're doing a very good job. A lot of people are upset because they're expecting, 20 DLCs worth of content all in the game from the beginning. And remember, this is the blank, bland, vanilla version. You go back and look at any of their games in the first month vanilla version and compare those to the 5-year later content that was out, you will be able to see that they start with their blank slate and then they get to the point to where the game is 100% amazing. This will get there. The weakness that they're currently facing, again, like I said, once characters running and the movement looked very stiff and robotic, now it's clean, it's real, it's almost as if everything's motion captured. But which they did use motion capture for some of the animals and some of the things. That's part of how they got it so good. The thing now that they need to work on are their NPC characters. They still have NPC zombie look. They still have the googly-eyed, wax-face NPCs running around. I highly recommend that Bethesda focus on NPC character improvements for their next games. Many people who play Bethesda-style RPGs don't care as much about that. They're primarily into the story, into the life. Again, Bethesda games, you're not just playing a game. You're creating a person and then living their life. That's the point of a Bethesda game. You could go where the story takes you, or you can go off on your own. But it's the story, the life, the immersion that makes Bethesda games great. And with the exception of that issue with some of the NPCs just looking so bad that they break the immersion, that is one of the things that they need to work on. Loading screens. Most Bethesda games have loading screens, and the only reason why anybody's upset about loading screens, unfortunately, because of the Witcher series. The Witcher 3 did such an exceptional job of having no loading screens. There were actually loading screens, but they were so well hidden, unless you understood the mechanics, you couldn't see them. And there was so much potential in this game to do that. Everything from hyperspace jumps to entering doorways, everything. They could have done a much better job of hiding the load screens. I don't think it was important for them because most Bethesda games have loading screens now. But we're reaching the point in gaming where people don't want that. We know, thanks to The Witcher 3, that it can be hidden. So now it is one thing that we do expect. We're kind of nitpicking with them. But yes, it is one thing that Bethesda needs to look at for the future. It would be real simple to do some tweaks to hide that. An example, ships making grav jumps. You go into grav jump, you get swirly colors going to a bright white solid screen, and then it instantly clicks to a black screen with a little white loading mark, and then back to bright white screen, and you come back into normal space. Why did they make the loading screen black? They could have made the loading screen white so that everything went to solid white and stayed solid white until you went back in to normal space. And then if they were to hide that loading icon, you wouldn't even realize that that was a load screen. And they could have done that with so many different things in this game. I think it was just an oversight on their part. And the thing is, they could easily patch it to hide most of those, and I hope they do. If not, again, modders will. Now let's talk about the story. The main storyline in Bethesda games is not the game. The main storyline is to get you started. Let's face it, how the Bethesda games work, they don't really have tutorials. Everybody thinks of the first few minutes of Skyrim and Fallout 4, well, it tells you press this button, that's the tutorial. That is not the tutorial. That is just to teach you basic controls. Excuse me. The actual... Well, let's see. How would I put it? They teach you how to play the character in like the first 10 to 20 hours, possibly 30 hours of the game. They teach you the basic controls, but there's no tutorial for the rest of how to play the game. They place you in opportunities and situations where you learn how to play the game in the first 30 hours. And then I always joke that the second 30 hours of the game is a singing simulator where you're just constantly screaming at the top of your lungs, I wish I knew that sooner, I wish I knew that sooner, I wish I knew that sooner. And that's kind of the way Bethesda games work, and it's part of the immersion in it as a person learning. You have to learn how things work, and this game is no exception. There are buttons, controls, interactions, things you can do, things you can't do that are not obvious. And a lot of people think that, oh, you're supposed to have a button pop up on screen with big giant arrows pointing at it saying press this button to do that. And in Bethesda games, as you've noticed, they're getting away from that. There's no longer at the end of a dungeon a bunch of giant arrows pointing at a very obvious loot chest. They're getting into the more realistic aspect of you have to use your eyes. You have to look around. Things aren't as obvious. You can run right past the loot chest and not even realize it's a loot chest because people are running around looking for markers and big giant pointing arrows, and it's that way with all of the interactions in the game. You have to pay a little bit more attention. You have to actually use your eyes, and you have to actually figure out how to do these things as part of the game. And the entire storyline is just there to get you started. So no, this isn't a game that you speed run. You don't run immediately to finish the storyline so you can get to NG+. If you do that, you're running past 95% of the content in the game. So you do have to slow down and pay a little bit more attention, and I could actually explain why that is, and it's primarily because of the procedurally generated nature of most of the encounters and interactions in the game. The procedural generation uses thousands of variables to create these interactions. And if you do one playthrough and you just run through the main storyline to get to NG+, you've ran through thousands of interactions without even starting them. And guess what? When you get to NG Plus and you run through again, it's not going to be the same because those interactions are procedurally generated. You could have completely different interactions under completely different circumstances, and those original ones you ran past, you could play the game for 10 years and not have those exact combinations come up again. So I highly recommend you do not run through the game bypassing every little distraction, because in Bethesda games those distractions are incredibly important. Those distractions are the interactions. You meet people, you see things that you would not otherwise see. And not only that, Bethesda has a tendency to hide one-of-a-kinds within those random encounters. Random encounters can mean a one-of-a-kind item, a one-of-a-kind ability, a one-of-a-kind experience that unless you happen to get that exact same combination come up again, you'll never see it again. So if you just run through the game, you could be running past 1,000 one-of-a-kind of experiences that you will never see again. So please slow down. And yes, I'm saying get distracted. Get distracted, then get distracted from your distraction, and then get distracted from your distraction from your distraction, because that's how you find the true gems that exist in Bethesda games. Now, let's go on to what I think is going to be up with DLCs. Again, this is covering some of the things that I did say. Weapons and armor, an armory crate style DLC. We all know it's coming. And then modders are going to do their own as well. Ships, Ships of the Line DLC. We all know it's coming. And again, if Bethesda doesn't do it, modders will. Outpost. We need things for the outpost system. A lot of people are complaining about ammo and different things like that, and the cost of purchasing is expensive. I believe you're going to start seeing more things like Fallout 4's Contraptions style DLC that will take outposts from being simple outposts to full-on factories. I'm talking about the type of factories that you find in the game manned by NPCs that are just massive. I think that will come, including your ability to just manufacture everything that exists in the game, every consumable, med packs, ammo, everything. In addition to that, a Vault style mod, massively expanding what the outposts can do, the same as they're going to do for ships. Me personally, the thing that I miss the most is ramps and stairways. It's hilarious because everyone complains about using ladders and it takes so long. Meanwhile, in Fallout 4, in Skyrim, everywhere, in all the other games, everybody complained that there's no animation for ladders. You just click and fast travel to the next floor. So everybody complained about not being able to use ladders, so Bethesda's like, fine, here's a ton of ladders you have to use, and now everybody's complaining about having to use ladders. So, but yes, there's a lot that they could do with the outpost building along with the ships and everything. And again, I think modders will come to the rescue for that. An example is if you look at the room that I'm spinning around in now, there's no internal walls of any type you can put up, so everybody's doing what I did. They are using office partitions as internal walls. Yeah, it's okay, it works, but it's the same as in Fallout 4 when everybody had their build their walls out of the big square concrete foundations until we got proper walls. So this game is at that point. I firmly believe everything we want will be added either by DLC or mods. One of the things that a lot of people are saying, and I agree with, is space station construction. There's no reason why you can't have an outpost in space in the form of a space station. Specifically to make use of those big gas giants that you can't land on and everybody's upset. Why can't you land on those? Well, it's a gas giant. There's no surface. It doesn't have land. It is a gas giant. Well, you can make those viable locations if you could build a low-orbit space station and harvest whatever gas the gas giant is made out of. And gas giants could have multiple gases make up the planets, and you should be able to build a low-orbit space station to capture those gases. Now think Cloud City and Star Wars. That is exactly what I mean. You should be able to create a low orbit, skimming the atmosphere or just inside the atmosphere, floating space station / sky city in order to mine gas giant resources, and you could have that space station building experience. One of the things, again, as I said, the DLC is going to tackle the planet's issue. With DLC and plus mods, those thousands of planets, or the 1,000 planets in the game, can have thousands of new locations added. DLC is going to do a bunch, mods are going to do 10 times more. And again, I think this is going to be a race between Bethesda and mod makers to see who can come out with these first, especially with like the ships and the weapons and outpost mods. Already the modders are hard at work on this, and Bethesda's going to have to pick up their game if they want their official ones that are for sale to come out first, because I think the mods might beat them to it. But in this game, I firmly believe that in a few years you're going to see videos of Starfield just like you saw of Fallout 4 and Skyrim. The videos of like Skyrim with all the DLC and 300 mods, Fallout 4 with all the DLC and 300 mods. You're going to see Starfield with all the DLC and 300 mods. That's coming, and we all know it. One of the things that I wanted to point out again of where Bethesda is moving with this, and I already spoke about like the VR version of the game. We all know it's going to come. It's probably going to be like 5 years or something. Bethesda will milk it as long as they can before they release that version, but it will come. But there's a few other things that a lot of people are missing that I think is really important. One of those, and I'll hear the moans now, is Fallout 76. Bethesda has tried their hand and figured out multiplayer. I would not doubt if multiplayer is introduced into Starfield in one way or another. Multiplayer could be a almost standalone type game where you build your ships in the base game, and then you could take those ships, load them into a multiplayer server, and you can battle your friends. So imagine a orbit of a planet map with all of the asteroids, 5 ships on your side, 5 ships on the enemy side, load in, and you battle your friends. You can fight with your friends, against your friends, just like any other multiplayer game out there. That could be introduced to this, as well as a multiplayer, just like how they made multiplayer mods for Skyrim and stuff like that, where you and a friend can load in and play in the same game. I would not doubt if eventually there is a multiplayer mode in Starfield where you and 4 of your friends could load into the one world. They would obviously have to transfer the seeds and the information for the planet itself, and then one person's seed would act as a host for everybody else. But you could have you and 4 of your friends in Starfield. And then you would have the situation of when you board the ship. One person is the pilot, one person runs weapons, one person does power and engines, one person manages the shields, and you engage in combat that way. Imagine if the pilot just flew the ship while the weapons officer did the targeting and firing. Think of all of the games with tank crews that are like war-based games. You have the driver, you have a weapons operator, you have the commander. You could see that type of implementation into Starfield, and since Bethesda is really poking their nose into the multiplayer genre, I would not doubt if that comes. There are a lot of possibilities where the game mechanics would allow a lot of this to fit in. The other thing is the procedural generation, which is based off of seeds that are randomly generated. It uses things like your clock. It uses the date, time, hours, minutes, all the way down to the milliseconds to create these seeds. That's why one person goes to a particular planet, lands in a particular spot, and it's completely different compared to what another person does because they have a different seed. One of the things that I think may come out is very similar to Minecraft. Eventually, I believe there will be a seed sharing network where people will be able to offer seeds showing these very interesting things, and people would be eventually able to enter those seeds into their game, maybe on a new save, maybe on an existing save, but they could enter those seeds in order to get those specific conditions within their game. So that's a pretty long shot and would be pretty far off, but we know it is doable because, well, Minecraft does it. One of the other things that I see a lot of people complaining about are bugs and issues in the game. So let's talk about the different versions of the game. There's the Xbox version, which is a console version of the game. There's the Microsoft version, which is a PC version of the game in quotes. Then there is the Steam version of the game. Well, if you notice online, the vast majority of the glitches and bugs that have been in the game have been on the Xbox and Microsoft version. There have been much less bugs on the Steam version. I have had 2 bugs. My second bug I just experienced earlier today. The first bug I had was lighting in the specific hab that I'm standing in right now. The lights were aimed upwards, so inside the hab was pitch black dark. You go on the roof, and even though the lights are pointing down, the light sources were pointing up. But this was not actually a bug in the game as much as it was a bug with the FSR on a NVIDIA graphics card. As soon as I installed DLSS mod on my game and I corrected the issues, I actually had to delete the bad habs and replace them. I have not had a single lighting issue since. So the DLS mod completely corrected all of the lighting issues everywhere. The second bug is one that I think is game engine, and that was NPCs exiting habs on hostile planets with no oxygen, and their suits go invisible. So they're walking around. I just had a character walking around on outdoors on a moon of Titan with no spacesuit, no nothing. And so that is a game engine bug that I think Bethesda is definitely aware of. A lot of people have spoken about it, especially with helmets, but it's actually the entire spacesuits most of the time. But Bethesda is working on that one. But most of the other bugs you see, as I said, are on the Xbox and Microsoft version. And a lot of people understand the Xbox version. Consoles are limited. And they're like, but people are like, well, but it's still on the PC version because it's on the Microsoft version. Well, remember, it's Microsoft with quotation marks. Excuse me. Microsoft, the PC version of their games are not exactly the same as the PC version of the games. And there's one aspect of that that a lot of people that know about it understand, but a lot of people misinterpret. Microsoft has the Play Anywhere feature. That is one of their big selling points for selling Microsoft games, meaning you can get the game and then you can go over to your brother's house, enter your account, download the game, and you can play it on his Xbox. Or you can go home and play it on your computer. Or you can log in, and play it from your computer at work. Or you could go over to someone else's house and again, enter your account and play it on their Xbox. So the Microsoft version of the game is very specifically meant to be compatible with consoles. That means it has many of the console limitations built in. And people say, oh, but what about the frame rate? The frame rate is set by a simple ini file. When you activate the game, there's a simple ini file that tells it what frame rate, whether it's 30 or 60 or whatever. That simple file is what tells it, and Microsoft uses a variable ini file. So the computer checks. If you're on a console, it caps it at 30. If you're on a PC, it caps it at 60. Well, the Steam version is unlimited. And when I say unlimited, what I mean is that it doesn't have limits on the amount of saves you can have, because the limits of the amount of saves are based on the limitations of the hardware of the Xbox on the Xbox and the Microsoft version. Steam does not have that limitation. I already have like 135 saves, and I could go back through all of them. The people who have the Microsoft and Xbox version are very limited. If they get too many saves, the system can't handle it, so it begins to collapse. The Steam version being unlimited as well is one of the big things about PC gamers. Anyone who's been around for a good while and understands the technology, the very thing we do on day one is hop in, and change the frame rate cap in the game. I went in day one and I play on a 144 hertz monitor. I set my cap at 144 hertz. With my hardware, I still only average around 90 to 120, 120 at best, 144 in menus, of course, but anyone who's a hardcore PC gamer immediately goes into the INI files and changes the caps. It's one of the reasons why you saw some of the very first mods that came out were mods that changed the frame rate caps, especially on things like the UI. The UI, even on the Steam version, was capped at 30 FPS, and one of the very first things people did was went in and they created a 60 FPS capped UI mod and a 120 capped UI mod. Me personally, I am running the 60 FPS UI capped mod. I don't need any more than that because of the HUD. To me is extraneous. I don't pay attention to it that much. So the smoothness of the HUD to me is a little bit irrelevant. To me, I think it's a little bit more immersive to have a little bit of lag with it because it's meant to represent mechanics or an actual item that your character is using. So I see it as animations of like climbing ladders and stuff. I want to feel like my character is using a piece of electronic equipment, so it doesn't just happen instantaneously. I want it to have that feel to it for the immersive purposes. Just to let you know, for my system also, I am on an i7 10700K. I'm on a B460 motherboard, which again is not overclocked. That's because I have a 10700K, but I don't overclock it. I just use it for the higher base frequency and boost. I have two M.2s in my system. I have a 500 gigabyte M.2 for my system and a 1 terabyte Steam M.2. So I keep Steam on the 1 terabyte with operating system on the 500. My graphics card is the EVGA 3060 Ti. I loved EVGA. I'm so sad that they are gone from the graphics card market. They use the highest quality components to build their cards, and that shows in the fact that I tend to get specs. If I go online and look at other people, my system performance with the 3060 Ti is beating most 3070s and in line, if not better than some of the 3080s. I have a light overclock on my card, but like I said, I get 95 FPS in Jimison most of the time. So one of the things about the specs with the game is a lot of the specs that came out, everybody said that didn't quite seem right. That didn't quite seem right. The recommended graphics card was a 2080. Recommended CPUs were 6-core CPUs. And a lot of people think that Bethesda specifically lowballed those specs was to increase sales, so that more people who had potato PCs would buy the game thinking that they could play it on Ultra. And I'll tell you right now, because I have two systems. I have an i7 9700K, and I have my 10700K. And I had a 40% uplift going from the 9700K to the 10700K. And that is because the 10700K being the 8-core and having the better performance really was important. So they vastly undervalued the requirements when it comes to CPU. I believe they pushed it again to get more sales, but at the same time, there's all these people saying I'm getting terrible performance on a 4090, and yeah, their specs were not quite right. And one of the other things is I play at 1440p. If I were to switch to 1080p, I would lose half of my performance. This game seems to be, especially the Steam version, much more optimized to 1440p compared to 1080. Everybody thinks, oh, 1080 is easy. Many games these days are starting to show performance reductions if you drop down to 1080p. This game does much better at 1440p than it does at 1080. I've not even bothered trying it at 4K because, again, I play on a 1440p monitor. But while people are saying that it struggles at 4K, many of the people saying it struggles at 1080 is because they haven't tried 1440p. It is much better at 1440p. Uh, I'll give you an example of my play settings. I am 1440p. I have almost all epic settings. I have a few high, and I only have shadows set to low. I'm running on 90% resolution using the DLSS mod, upscaled. I like I say, I average around 95 to 98 FPS with my lows at around 60, and of course I have it capped at 144 because of my monitor, so that's my cap, and usually in menus. Um, like I said, I average, well over 100 saves with no problems. The closest thing to a major glitch that I had was a hang up on a save, which is a Bethesda thing. We all know Bethesda corrupting your saves is an issue. I tried to save and it just hung up. It wouldn't let me save. So I actually had to go turn off the PC because it completely would not respond, start it back up, and luckily my prior save was just a couple minutes behind, and then that's never happened again. I think that is a bug issue with timing. I just happened to hit a door and try to save at an exact point when it just wasn't really timed well to have it happen, and that's pretty much it. Um, and it's pretty much not a Bethesda game unless it eats at least one of your saves. We all know how that is. But yeah, this is my impressions of Starfield. Do I think the game is worth it? Yes. Um, in fact, one of the things that I recommend is that if you get the game now, take your time playing it. And the key is take your time, discover all the random stuff that exists in the vanilla because DLCs are coming. Everybody knows, all of us people that bought the early release is the Shattered Space DLC that will be coming out. That was included with the early access purchase, so that's why I got it. There will be DLC that comes out, and again, this game will have more DLC than all of their other games put together. I firmly believe that. There's so much potential for DLC, and I'm talking about big DLC, like $25 DLC for the massive shipbuilding. I think that will be there. There will be little $5 and $10 DLCs for weapons, armor. Every single faction needs to have their own DLC. I would love to see a Pirates of the Caribbean style DLC for pirates to make pirating not just a simple quest line, but an entire way of life. The UC Vanguard. I could see UC Vanguard being turned into basically Halo. Where you have to go out and new monsters, new enemies, much more violent enemies being added in, and you have to go fight them. I could see Freestar Ranger basically becoming Firefly. It's obvious that there are a lot of Firefly references with the Freestar Collective, and I think they should just embrace it and go with it. You could see the Freestar Collective, you can become basically the equivalent of a good guy sheriff, but good guy is a relative point of view. I could see that one being a big focus of a lot of the smuggling. So, the good old Firefly, we're smuggling, but we're smuggling for a good reason, could be an entire DLC as there. And also, don't forget the religions. For all we know, the Great Serpent may be real. Even the religions can have their own DLC, because whether we accept it or not, the Far Harbor DLC was essentially the Children of Adam DLC. Yes, it had the Institute in it and had everything, but let's face it, it was the Children of Adam DLC. I could see that for the religions in this game as well. So there's huge amounts of opportunities for DLC, from physical items to quests, and I imagine every modder out there who does quest DLCs already has a huge list of 80 to 100 different quest mods. I would love to see an Aliens, like the Aliens 2 movie, themed, where you and a group of NPCs have to go into a colony where aliens have attacked and they're running around inside. There are quests in the game that give you that feel, but I think they should just go ahead and add in the full blown xenomorphs. Modders might do it, add the whole thing in, run around killing xenomorphs, the whole thing. That could be added in, and I'm sure it will be at some point. So, for all the people who are upset at the game right now, do me a favor. Go back, reload Fallout 4, reload Skyrim. No DLCs, strictly vanilla, and step into the game and compare it to what you think of those games now. The first month of Fallout 4 sucked. The first month of Skyrim kinda sucked. It wasn't until they got all their patches, got everything fixed, and then they started rolling out their DLCs and the mods that the games became the amazing things they are today. And I think Starfield will get that to the 10th power just because there's way too much opportunity. And the fact that the creation engine has been out so long, one of the reasons why they're not changing it is because it is so easy to work with. There are literally thousands of modders who know the creation engine like the back of their hand, and they are going to go nuts building mods for this game. So just hang on, be patient, don't rush your playthroughs. The NG Plus is not... That is meant to be a reward for completing the game, not finishing the game, completing the game. And if you just mad rush through it, you're literally permanently passing up huge amounts of the game because your chance to see those same interactions again in the future are 1,000,000 to 1 shot. So slow down, play, and expect the DLCs and mods to start rolling. So that's my advice after 1 month of play. And this is Bad Day Guy Gaming signing off.